everybody. My name is Gregory Q. Jenkins, and you are listening to the Quintasia podcast. Welcome. Thank you very much for stopping by. In case this is your first time that you have come our way, we are an independent producer and distributor of film and television programs. And our podcast, we're going to talk about the kind of content that we hope to bring to you. So today on our show, we actually have a guest. So we're excited, and we're going to bring this to you today, and we're going to talk about his film, which we're also happy to announce that we've recently acquired the rights to, and we'll be distributing that film. So we're going to talk about HANN. I would like to introduce to you Runar Thor. He is an Icelandic filmmaker and the director of the short film HANN, which screened at numerous festivals around the world this year, winning 2 Best Film Awards. So, Runar, welcome to our broadcast, and thank you for stopping by.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So, let me start by asking you, what was the inspiration behind the movie?
The movie was mostly inspired by my relationship with my own father and my own coming out experience. I was 27 years old when I came out of the closet, and I had identified as gay for over 10 years, but never really had the courage to come out until I was 27 years old. And the biggest reason why I waited so long was because of this, internalized fear of how other people might perceive me, how my friends would treat me differently, how my family would treat me differently, but most of all, how my father would treat me differently or see me differently. Because my father was this role model in my life. He was this strong figure who I always looked up to, and I never wanted to disappoint him. And I could never imagine that he would want a son who was gay. So when the time came that I actually did come out, I lacked the courage to actually tell my father, face to face. So I told my sister, and she told him for me. But on that day, he had just picked up, how to work Facebook. He went on there. He put his status on his profile, and it read, "My son, I'm so proud of you. Always be true to yourself." And that just kind of shattered me. It was not what I expected at all from him. But he definitely, outperformed my expectations of him. And that's sort of what inspired the film itself.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that story. I know that there are a lot of people out there who obviously at some point in their lifetimes, either they have gone through that or they will be going through that. So I think it's an important message to get out there. Let me also follow up and ask you, and before I ask the question, I'll just preface it. One of the things that we are focused on at Quintasia Studios is we want to bring to the public content that is from people of color and people in the LGBTQ community. But and of course, everybody, if you look at Hollywood now, everybody, is on that trip, if you will, for lack of a better word. But I think what we want to be different, and even as you look at the intro, if you watch the podcast on YouTube, you'll see in the intro what we want to be different about this is we think it's important that people of color and LGBTQ persons control their own narrative. And that's what I think is going to be different in terms of, we have other people telling our stories and telling it the way they think that people of color or lesbian and gay are portrayed, but I want actual people, I want us to be telling those
Mhm.
stories because I think it will be different.
Yeah.
So what do you think about in today's world about the representation, or what changes would you like to see in the way lesbian and gay characters are portrayed in Hollywood?
Yeah, I think, as you say, I think there's a lot of people on that trip right now. The studios are all, the big studios are all shifting towards it, but from what I've seen, most of them lack that like authenticity factor. And that's probably due to the fact that the people behind the camera are not necessarily, you know, identifying as queer or LGBTQIA. So it's more perhaps some decision makers that might not exactly fall into that category. So I think if a studio would come forward now and sort of like embrace the authenticity aspect and try to strive for real stories that people actually relate to, not just pretty stuff that they think people want to see, just like actual stories. I think that's great to see. If we see more smaller studios pop up like that. And I think that's something we're going to see from the smaller studios before we ever see it from the big ones, because the smaller studios got to pioneer.
I totally agree, and that's our focus, and that's what we're trying to do. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Quintasia podcast. Coming up next, we're going to be joined by Randy Wang of Quintasia Studios, who is also going to join in our conversation.
Greg, thank you for that. Thor, welcome to the podcast.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure working with you, in our other ventures. So I'm glad, to have you with us today. So my first question to you is, why did you choose to work with Quintasia? So, kind of what led you to that decision, if you don't mind just cluing our listeners in on that.
Well, for context, I the thought process that I was going through when I made HANN was I wanted to tell a story that I felt like people needed to see. I felt like I wanted to create a story that when I was 17 or 8 years old, needed to see. And maybe if I had seen it, I wouldn't have waited until I was 27 years old to come out of the closet and embrace, who I am and love who I am. So the mission statement and what Quintasia stands for is really lines perfectly with what I hope to do with everything I'm doing with all the films that I want to create and the stories I want to tell. Having a studio like that shares my values is I think very important, and yeah, I think it's just great to have.
Right. And just to piggyback off of that, I think with Quintasia, we're here to create a safe space for people to tell their stories, to voice their opinions, an environment where it's understanding. And I think, that's our primary focus. So it's been our pleasure working with you. Next, so why do you think accurate representation matters, especially in this day and age?
um, because I think stereotypes, both the negative ones and the positive ones, can impede progress, because if the audience can never be allowed to get to know these characters, like what it truly is to be what it truly is to be in the LGBTQIA community, or being queer, or being transgender, or gay, then they'll never empathize. They'll never understand. So if we're always trying to color it a certain way to appeal to the mainstream, then they're never going to understand the real deal behind it all. Stereotypes are easy. They're lazy. That's why most people do them. Most studios, most creators do them. But it takes a lot of work to be authentic and deliver something real,
Mhm.
something uncomfortable. Like make people uncomfortable. That's how you make an impact in your work.
Right. So I mean, so to go off of that, in terms of the representation, how do you see it differently in the U.S. versus back at home in Iceland? Has there been a major difference between the two or is it pretty similar?
I think it's to a certain degree, it's probably a bit similar, but there's more mainstream work in Iceland that deals in more, authentic content, original stories, like in the queer stories, for example. When they're told in Iceland, they're always kind of like more serious, more
Mhm.
depressing, if you will, sometimes. But they're real, they're authentic, and they're usually written and made by people who actually identify that way. But yeah, that's probably the biggest difference that I can see between the two countries. But I think Iceland has a long way to go as well.
Good, good. That's good. So with that said, again, thank you to our audience for tuning into the Quintasia podcast. So with that said, I'm going to pass it back over to Greg.
And thanks for that. I wanted to jump in and ask, so when you had your own experience of coming out to your father, do you think that, and I don't know if you would agree that there have been advances or, in telling, um, you know, s stories of the LGBTQ community. So do you think the fact that, for instance, that in the US, we've had high profile members, lesbian and gay actors and community
Mm.
members who've come out and who have shared, this is who I am. And certainly many countries now have gone and, it's definitely been the equivalent of the civil rights movement for the queer community. Do you think that because of this awareness, that perhaps that explains why some people, such as yourself, when they do get to that point where they come out to their parents, that experience maybe is going different and hopefully better than, let's say, it would have been 20 years ago?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think we've definitely come a huge way. Even from when I came out, that even then we were in a pretty good place. But while kids are still going through depression and even committing suicide because they just can't cope with who they are, then we're still not there yet. And I definitely think, yeah, as you say, the celebrity icons in Hollywood, when they actually come out as anything other than cis or straight, then we're making strides. We're making sure people in marginalized groups, they see representation on the big screen and in the mainstream media, and more of that is going to help, definitely.
You're listening to the Quintasia podcast, and coming up next, we're going to have Harv Lacko, who's also a member of our leadership team at Quintasia Studios, and he's going to ask Runar some questions.
Welcome, podcasters and Runar. I'm Harv Latko. I'm the CTO of Quintasia, part of the leadership team, and we're all on a journey. So, welcome to the family, Runar. In terms of demand from the market, could you just help me understand, because I am very analytical,
Yeah,
what that looks like?
sure. I think you only have to look to shows like Euphoria. Like they are very authentic in their telling of teenage queer lives. The show is not even necessarily about queer um, identity as a whole, but their characters. They have transgender issues. They have or just like the spectrum of sexuality is the topic as well. And I think that's very authentic. More stories like that, exactly like that, and like in HANN, where the father is or the parents are pressuring you into, or like trying to like unknowingly kind of expecting them to have the opposite gender partner or romantic relationships without ever leaving any room for what if it's something else. Yeah, and I'm hoping
Right.
that like stories like mine maybe change that way of thinking. Like, and parents start asking their children like who who are you interested in? Is it a boy? Is it a girl? Like, it doesn't matter to me. Just as long as you're happy.
Right. Eh,
Think-
Thor, is there any upcoming projects or any work that you're sort of have your eyes set on that you'd like to share with our podcast audience?
Yeah. I'm currently writing a full feature film called Rooftops. It's still in the first draft stage, so I'm not gonna go into too much detail, but it takes place in New York City. It's a love story about, you know, the sexual spectrum and coming to terms with who you are. And I wanted to go a little bit of a different direction than with HANN. And I made the lead character, a minority in the Rooftops. I chose to make him Chinese because my boyfriend is Chinese, and I kind of, because it's always, you know, do I trust myself to give accurate representation to
Sure.
a Chinese perspective, like family life and all that? But I felt confident about it because I have him with me to consult me on it, and, you know, give his advice and make sure that I'm not, you know, straying from the authenticity of it.
Well,
But yeah,
thank you very much, Runar. I really appreciate you becoming a part of the Quintasia Studios family. We look forward to working with Han and your upcoming work. And I'd like to turn it back over to Greg at this.
Thanks, Harv. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Quintasia podcast, and thank you very much for tuning in. Runa, I just wanted to follow up with something that you said earlier, and that I'm curious about. If you know there are, and of course the suicide issue is a big of concern, of course. What would you have any thought? What would you want to say to someone who might be struggling with coming to terms with their identity and might be feeling the pressure, if you will, of not meeting other people's expectations and feeling overwhelmed, and maybe they are now kind of in despair? What do you think might help them kind of change their thinking and get them on a path to better mental health?
yeah, I think it's important to have somebody to talk to, some confidant, definitely. But don't, like, just because I regret not taking the steps earlier doesn't mean everybody is in a place and environment to take the steps early. Sometimes you're, you know, stuck in a very conservative household and you need to become 18 years old so you can leave and start your own life before you can actually come out. But so every situation is different. But I would say try to talk to people, ask yourself questions like, am I overthinking this? Is my family maybe going to be okay with it? But again, every environment is different. So I think the important part is just to trust yourself, ask yourself questions, and have somebody to talk to and share. And do it when you're ready. Take the step whenever you feel like you're ready. Don't rush it.
Um, and I will share something with you and with the audience in terms of how I came to the place that I am right now. When I grew up, when I was a teenager, I was, in a very religious background. And of course, as you might, a very conservative religious background. And, we thought about, um, you know, issues of homosexuality and stuff, usually in a very negative light. And I would have been one of those people who was out there um, trying to quote unquote save um, those people. But I'll never forget what started to change my thinking. There was it's kind of like a famous clip that was going around. I won't name the name of the church, but there was this pastor from this church, and they were at a protest. Um, and he was yelling at this woman who identified as a lesbian, And I just saw the visceral hate that was coming from that exchange, and I'm saying there is nothing godlike about that. And he kept at it until this person broke down in tears. And I said, I never want to be that person. I decided right then and there that if you're going to make people, because I know as a person, as an African American, I've been in that situation where, you're made to feel ashamed about, who you are. I would never want to do that to another human being. And that's what really started my evolution. So I'm happy to be in a place now where, hopefully I can help to elevate the discussion.
Yeah, just on that note that you mentioned that, I think that's probably the only silver lining in extremism. When people get this, like, on that end of the polar spectrum, like with the MAGA people and all of that, like because of their like super zealous attitudes, they might push people who are somewhere here on the spectrum away from them.
Yes, and let's hope that there's more. I think, and this is why I believe that the media, the role that the media plays, is so important. I think having exposure to this, I think many of us have either family members or friends who identify as queer, if you will. And I think that if you know them as people, they're still people. They're still, I think back to, members of my family. And, I always knew, it was not a secret to me. And it wasn't, I guess if I was going to talk to the religious community, one of the things, and I know this will be controversial to some, it's not, a lot of people still have this in their mind that this is like a choice, that one day you woke up and you decided to do that. And I hope people will start to realize that no, this is central to your DNA, to your being, just as, you know, me being a person of color is central to my being. Um, it's part of our makeup, and I think if we all get a chance to see each other, interact with each other, we'll hopefully learn to appreciate each other as human beings. At least that's our mission.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well,
Share that.
it's been a pleasure having you with us. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for making your film, and we hope to hear more from you in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking with Runar Thor, the maker of the short film HANN, and you are listening to the Quintasia podcast. We thank you. You can actually see the visual portion of this podcast on YouTube. And we hope that you have a good day. And by all means, please come back. Thanks a lot and see you later.